That's fine.
Okay, guys, I really do appreciate everybody coming. I think we're about ready to get started here. We're going to have about an hour presentation from the Maritime Research Division. Besides Nate Fulmer and Jessica Irwin, we also have Dave Gigi Mori with the Charleston Museum. Columbia Museum. But pretty much between these three folks, about any question you would have about the hobby diver license, legislation, past, present, future, and even some of the surrounding states, for some of you guys that might hunt in some of the surrounding states. They do work with the other departments, other states. But pretty much I'm going to hand the floor over to them, and they're going to give us about an hour, and I'm sure there'll be question and answer at the end of it. Thank you guys for coming.
So I'm Jessica Irwin. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Charleston office of the Maritime Research Division. I have my master's degree in underwater archaeology, but I have been a fan of archaeology since I was little. It's the only thing I ever wanted to do, so this is like kind of my whole life. So who we are kind of a weird entity. We fall under both the University of South Carolina and the State of South Carolina. So technically we are a state office, but the University of South Carolina houses us. And then within that, our specific division is under the South Carolina Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology. So there's also the terrestrial division of that. We have some folks out at the Savannah River site, and we, as an institute, monitor the entire state for archaeology as much as we're able. So then me and Nate are from the Maritime Research Division, and the Maritime Research Division is who monitors the hobby license program. So our division is actually only made up of 4 people, so we have a lot of work between the 4 of us. Jim Spyrick is a state underwater archaeologist. He gets to deal with all the really fun federal stuff and grant writing and all that great technical stuff. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator. Nate Fulmer administers the hobby license program for us, and he's also an archaeologist. And then we have Joe Beatty, who is an archaeologist, and he does a lot of the technical stuff in terms of getting when you want to build and you submit permits if you want to build a dock on the river and those kind of things. Right now we're also really fortunate. We have an archaeologist with us named Dan Brown. He's not here tonight. He's in Columbia. He's with us for 2 years to help us with some of the offshore wind energy monitoring and remote sensing and all of that fun stuff to see if that's something that's going to be viable. And then we also work with Dave Gigi Mori, who is the state paleontologist, and he helps us with the licensing side that you all deal with a lot more, which is the fossils and those kind of things. So even though he's not in our division, he's an honorary member. So what we do as a division, we wear a lot of hats. Our main goal is to preserve and protect the maritime resources in the state of South Carolina. And that's actually a really big job because we have lots of rivers, we have offshore up to 3 miles, all the harbors, ports, etc. in the entire state. We do public education and outreach, events like tonight. We also we went down to the CSS Georgia cannon raising. We'll go talk to school groups, all those kind of things, just to educate people about South Carolina's history, which a lot of it has to do with water and waterways. We manage the hobby diver program. We also act as first responders to submerged sites when they're brought to our attention. So a lot of what we've been reacting to lately is people who see canoes eroding out of the rivers and riverbanks, but we've gone out for people who, shrimpers, who've snagged on something that's new. Is it a shipwreck? Is it someone's car? I'm sure in the next few months and weeks we'll get more and more of that with the recent flooding event. We do historical research, so when we're not doing all the technical state stuff, that is what our passion is to actually study history. Nate got to go up to Washington, D.C. to work on one of our projects for a week and go to the archives there. And so we try to do that in the time that we can allocate for it. We support other organizations and institutions, so we're not gonna be able to make it to Fall Field Day this year, but that's another South Carolina archaeology organization. We support the State Museum. If someone needs a consult about maritime history or anything of any of the museums in the state, we're happy to support them. We just did a big thing with Brown's Ferry and stuff like that. And then we also consult for projects for other organizations. So I've been working with Army Corps of Engineers, to get all of their data and survey maps ready for a possible dredging project in the future. Anytime they do, the repeat or the beaches, like if they're going to dredge, like we go out, we look at the dredge sites, we look at the deposit sites to see what it's going to impact, how it's going to impact, and we support all those federal organizations when they're working within the state as well. So some of our fun recent stuff we've been doing. So you guys might have seen in the news recently, we raised 3 cannons up in Florence off the CSSPD. This project took about 20 years, give or take, to make it happen. There's a saying that we definitely heard to be true when we were up there, that everyone in Florence County has a piece of the CSSPD in their house. Every single person that was from there, we had it open to the public when we physically took them out of the river. Oh, I've got a timber from that ship. Oh, I have this, I have that. So the location of the wreck had been known basically since it sank. There's a really great group of people up there. They bought this property that is adjacent to this river because it was a Confederate naval yard. They've surveyed the entire property and are doing their best to kind of figure out where things were and how it was working. There is no map of that naval yard to be found anywhere. I'm sure somewhere in someone's grandpa's journal's attic somewhere there's a beautiful map of it. We just have yet to find it. So we raised 3 cannons. The whole project was funded independently. That's the other reason why it took so long, is that we had to fund this project through independent groups who fundraise, which is why these cannons will be staying in Florence County after they're conserved at Warren Lash, which is where the Hunley is. So you can see here we had some great backhoe activity, pulling those guys up. Folks from the Hunley Center came out, wrapped them up, got them ready to transport to Charleston. They arrived at Charleston to go to specially constructed tanks to undergo electrolytic reduction. We're really lucky that they're in freshwater, so where if these cannons have come out of the ocean, they might take anywhere from 15 to 18 years to conserve. We're looking at less than 2 years. So they were gorgeous. But the reason that you do wrap them up is because you could see them start to rust the instant that we expose them to the air. We also have been doing a long-term project looking at the stone fleet. So these are 2 separate fleets of ships that were sunk outside of Charleston Harbor in an attempt to block blockaders and control the harbor a little bit better. Didn't really work, but nonetheless, they stripped them down, loaded them up with stone, took them out there, sunk them. So this project was funded through the National Battlefield Protection Act as a possible new battlefield that might go into the federal protection zone, which would be really great. It would be the first kind of underwater battlefield that would be protected. So what we've done for that, first we started out with survey, which is magnetometer, side scan to kind of see what was out there. Everyone kind of told us, like through verbal record, oh, they went out there and they sank and then they were covered with sand and that's why no one's been able to find them. But then we would hear from shrimpers and other people fishing out there, well, no, there's like a spot out there where my anchor and my nets always catch and, this, that, and other things. So we went out, we did our remote survey, we found a bunch of targets, so we ground truth them, which meant we dove on them, and lo and behold, there they all were. There's a few that are still missing that we know about from the records that they sank there, but for pretty much there's some ballast piles out there that we were able to find. The ground is nice and hard out there, so we now know more about the site formation processes that take place outside of the harbor and kind of how things preserve. Now, they're not super exciting. They're basically big piles of rocks. But we learned a lot about those kind of things, and as we continue to look at it, maybe in the future we might get to excavate one of them or a partial piece of one, but because we know that they were ships that were stripped down, loaded up with rock and debris, and purposely sunk, we'll find some timbers and some fasteners, but there's not going to be like any treasure or anything really exciting out there. We also do site surveys, so if you come across a potential site or we hear about a potential site, we'll go out and check it out. These are 3 that we have done, I think within the past kind of 2 years. Nate did Gaston Creek. There was an attempt to kind of say, hey, can we save Gadsden Creek? And so we went out and looked, and unfortunately that ship sailed about 40 years ago. So, you know, whenever we develop in marshland, rivers and waterways change, and so what was Gadsden Creek is now Gadsden Trickle, and there's not really a lot that we could do to bring it back. The Turtle Island canoe was a canoe that you can see was eroding out of the marsh, so they went out, they took core samples to see how long the canoe was, if it's a canoe that was worth pulling out and preserving. One of the difficulties that we have with the canoes is they do take a lot of time to conserve, and we won't physically remove something from an in situ site unless we have a plan and the money and the facilities to conserve it, make sure it's properly taken care of, and that it has a forever home. The canoe that we are currently working on is out at Defusky Island. They pulled that canoe out. It's been sitting in its peat, which is a process that kind of reinflates the wood cells, for a little over 2 years, and we're going to have some folks from East Carolina University come up to finish that conservation process, but it's a really long drawn out process of drying the wood and then doing some other chemical stuff to it. And once you figure out how you want to display it, putting screws and all sorts of scary stuff that you can't undo. So, but there's a lot of canoes in South Carolina, so we do our best to look at all of them, so at least we can document them, even if we don't have the resources to preserve them in perpetuity. And then I don't know anything about the Hobcaw project, but Nate does.
That spans pretty much the prehistory and history in South Carolina. We had everything from Native American sites to early colonial material, some mid-19th century shipwrecks. In the early 20th century, it was a very popular yachting site. A lot of rich and famous folks, including a couple of presidents, brought their yachts down. And like I said, we looked at just about every possible time period on different sites within that. It was about a half-mile area in front of Hobcaw Dairy.
Another project that we did this year, it's actually a multi-year project, is the Yemassee Indian Settlement Survey. So this was funded through an ART grant, which is a grant that the University of South Carolina will sometimes grant to an anthropology or archaeological program, depending on its merit. And this basically in Beaufort County was looking at Yemassee sites to see how many settlement sites have eroded from the high ground on the bluffs into the rivers. So if you look at a map even from, you know, the 40s, 50s to now, you can see that the way that the rivers turn has completely changed. Then you add the addition of people building, you know, their nice big houses and putting docks in and dredging and those kind of things, and you get a lot of different erosion rates. So what we wanted to see was, have any of these sites that we identified as possibilities before, have they eroded into the river? How much erosion? Is this a way for us to potentially identify new sites in the future? And most of the sites that we were looking for are just around contact period. So while we were, you know, looking for those ceramics and pottery and arrowheads and those kind of things, we were also hoping to find maybe some kind of trade over artifacts, so metalworked artifacts, things that would show the span that these potential sites have were occupied. Now, fortunately, this time around we didn't really find anything, but in our world, that information is just as valuable as if you come up with positives. So we know now that if there was occupation on, you know, the 10 sites that we looked at, it may have just been a seasonal occupation. It may have been a one-time only occupation. It may have been a high water occupation where this was they only were there for one season because the rivers were extremely high or extremely low. So it does give us a lot of information about those kind of things, even though when you're in the field, it's not as fun because you're not finding anything. So Dave actually worked on this project. This was an emergency recovery. We got a report that there was a skull in the Ashley River, back and forth with one of our licensees. It's eroding, it needs protecting. So Dave went out on his weekend, on his own time, with a couple of our volunteers. They went out, they checked it out, decided yes, this was something that was in danger. So they had a really good time, I think, getting nice and muddy, trying to get it out, but keeping as much of it in, in situ with contextual information as they possibly could. And then Dave has been working on it over at the State Museum. This is like the nice, pretty, cleaned up pictures. and this is the underwater picture. And let me also just say that Dave doesn't dive. He doesn't really like water. So when the water was like up to here, you know, he wasn't super happy.
More like up there. I'll take a shower, but
yeah.
water when it starts getting
So,
up my deck.
you know, this, like, the urgency of these kind of situations, we do want to preserve these kind of things when they come along as much as we are able to. The other big, not glamorous project that we're working on right now is document digitization. So this sounds, you know, like, oh, you should have all these modern technologies. Well, me and Nate over in our trailer over at Fort Johnson, we have about 40 years of paper files related to the hobby license program. And we are working in as much as we can to get all of those files digitized so that we have a backup so that we can protect those files. Honestly, one of the thoughts that was going through my mind during this last storm was, this hurricane hits, like, what are we gonna do? We're gonna lose all this paper. So we've been trying our best to get all of this digitized as quickly as we possibly can. We got a huge donation of $300 to be able to get this really nice scanner. So we've been using that. I like it, you know, it scans 30 pages per minute. So we can, when we have time to work on it, we work on it as much as we can. And our goals with this are a couple layers. One, we're creating a database of all of our divers that we've had prior to our 2010 transition to having the applications and filing process online. So that's still a lot of files. We want to make this database searchable, and so currently the way that our records are, because of how the program was established, is we can either look up divers, say from the 70s, by their hobby license number or their last name, but it's not in alphabetical order. So if you know, like, were licensed 15, 20 years ago and you don't remember your license number, it takes us like hours to dig through the old files to try to find your old license number and where you were, all of that information. So we want to make this database searchable in that capacity, but also we want to take the information in those files and say, okay, you know, Dave was diving over in the Edisto and the Ashley, and these were the kind of things that he was finding. Now let's compare that to his dives recently. What is he finding? How are we finding a lot of the same things? Or are we not finding the same things? Are his favorite spots from 20 years ago completely barren now? So we're taking that information from the old files and putting it into a mapping program called ArcGIS to make these kind of two full databases so that we can just analyze the data that we collect from divers in a more comprehensive way. The system that we have developed is completely closed circuit, so it's not connected to the internet. The people who have access to it at this point in time are myself and me. Because our files are not open to the Freedom of Information Act, and all of the files in the entire country pretty much related to archaeological and paleontological sites are closed, this is the best way for us to protect the information that divers have been giving us for the past 40 years. We don't want anyone to go out and raid anyone else's sites. We don't give away site information, but like I said before with the Yemassee Indian project, it's just as important to us to know what is no longer there as it is to know what is there. So this also, you know, ensures further protection of the sites that we know about archaeologically and potential future sites. We can learn a lot about erosion rates. You know, fossil beds are not a renewable resource. Once they've completely eroded away, they're gone. So we would like to know, you know, how quickly are these things eroding away? That way we can eventually know, you know, how thick the entire deposit was. Is it consistent? Does it show up in different places in the river, etc.? We want to look at possible overlooked sites. One of the problems with the old paper system that we're hoping to remedy now is that maybe, you know, a site got reported and it was just a little side note and it got overlooked by someone. And so now we can try to go back and say, hey, they said there was a canoe here or a shipwreck. Maybe we should go check that out because we don't have that in our designated site files, and that might be something of historic importance. We also want to look at site destruction rates. People destroy sites, but nature destroys sites as well. And there's this whole big thing, a lot of grad students write their thesis about it, about site formation and site destruction process, how fast metal erodes, how fast wood erodes. So we're not going to ever really be able to get into anything as super technical unless we had a grad student come in and do that, but we can do a general overview of, there was 20 barges in this river and now there's none. What happened? Was it people? Was it the river? Was it weather? Is there a pollutant upriver? Things like that. And then also riverbed movement. We live essentially in a marshy swamp, so the river is going to take the path of least resistance. The way that the river was before a lot of the development is completely different than the way that the river is now. And that's something that we want to monitor so that we can say, hey, 30 years ago, the river was 200 yards that way. Maybe this shipwreck that they're talking about in this letter isn't where we're standing in, 5 feet of water. Maybe it's over there where we can just walk up to it and go check it out. So now I'm going to talk about the hobby license program. And before I get into it, I'm just going to give a general overview. I'm not going to get into the legislation and all the technicalities and the ins and outs. If you have a question about something specific in the law, in the language of the law, I'm happy to address that at the end or address concerns that you have individually. But this is just an overview of what we do, how we do it, and kind of our day-to-day process with it. So first of all, the license program is unique to South Carolina. We're the only state in the United States that allows collection of fossils and artifacts. I know that in Florida, they allow the collection of shark's teeth. I know that, right now in Georgia, their laws are kind of ambiguous, but we're the only organization in the country that is trying to create an open dialogue between collectors and professionals, and that's because there's 2 of us. There's 4 of us total. The eyes and the ears of the state are out with the hobbyists who enjoy this, who have a passion for it, but don't try to pay their bills with it. And if you do try, you probably won't be very successful because it's hard. So we want this kind of dialogue, which is why the state has this program. There's extensive waterways in South Carolina, which is another reason for that. There's no possible way for us to monitor them all, and we don't want to. We want to protect what's historically significant and do our best to preserve, but we're not trying to get out there and be on the water and police everything. So with that, and this is something that other states are have considered, is this is the best way to preserve and protect. If the public has a vested interest in making sure that the Hunley comes out and stays in South Carolina and is able for the public to view, then that's what's going to make it happen. A couple archaeologists and some academics, yelling and screaming is not going to be as loud as the public who wants to protect and has an interest in keeping these things here. So the other thing that it does is that our program also monitors changes to South Carolina's waterways and to what people enjoy doing and what people don't enjoy doing. So, a few years ago, there was collecting off of shipwrecks was much more popular than it is today. Now, most people who are here in South Carolina diving are here for the fossils. So it just is a way for us to have an open dialogue with the community. So what a hobby license is a license that is required to legally collect and retain artifacts and fossils from state waterways. It allows for temporary, intermittent, recreational, small-scale, non-commercial search and recovery of submerged property. So this license is not designed for anyone to be going out every single day and collecting 100 things. This is a license that is for a hobby, to go out, to dive, to enjoy yourself, to collect if you want to collect, but to enjoy what our state has to offer without the possibility of it being overexploited. And we issue 2 types of license, 6 months or 2 years, and we issue in-state and out-of-state licenses. Depends on your address, but yeah. So what the license allows for is surface collection underwater. So this is, it can be kind of confusing, but on a basic level, riverbeds, underwater, state waterways, up to where the high tide hits, is what this license allows you to collect for. If you decide to collect on private property, that is your own prerogative. I would encourage you to get permission from the property owner, but that's kind of outside of our purview. It allows for the exploration of state lands near the water, except for state national parks and protected areas. So state and national parks have their own whole set of rules. If you want to mess with that, by all means go for it. It's not something I would want to do. It's a really good way to get arrested. Just, yeah. And then the protected areas, I'm sure that you all saw all the warnings, like for this protected area is flooded, this nature preserve is flooded. Those areas that are designated for wildlife protection, hunting, those kind of things, they have their own rules. So while state waters, like your license does allow you to go in there, if they have a no trespassing in that protected area, regardless of if the river flows through there or not, if you can't go on there, you can't go on there. So our license isn't gonna help you or protect you if you decide to go into a protected area. The license also gives you the right to keep what you've found after you've reported your finds. So this is the other way that we really differ from any other state. Anything that comes out of state waters is property of the state. However, we don't have like an exponential warehouse of places to store everything that could potentially, that comes out of the waterways. So we are happy to work with the public with this agreement that to let anyone, to let you keep what you find with the purview that, hey, tell us what you found, tell us where you found it, and it's yours. And that just goes into the data. Like I think we've had one seizure in the past 20 years, and that's because some guy pulled a canoe out, and that is way beyond the scope of this hobby license. If you can pick up a canoe with just your hands of surface collection, like, I'm really impressed. Like, you must have some kind of superpower. So again, to where you can collect, this is kind of a really basic graphic, but our license allows you to collect in state waters. So this is kind of a little graphic to just like really bring it down. So you have the low level, the water line. So below the water line, you need a license. And then everything past that is outside of our kind of scope of control. So we collect information in a couple ways. We have your application, which kind of just tells us how many divers we have, where they're coming from. I think we're a few hundred away from hitting the 6,000 diver mark right now, so that's exciting. And then your quarterly reports is how we collect the other information. And so I know that the quarterly reports can be a little confusing, but basically, 4 times a year is when your reports are due. That doesn't mean that you have to wait until the end of the quarter to send us your report. If you're only diving, like we were just talking about diving, the water's getting cold, it's winter. If you say do 1 dive this quarter, you don't have to wait to January to tell us you dove in November. Like, you can send us your report in November if you know you're not going to be diving. You don't have to wait to the end. Or if you throw your back out and the doctor says, hey, guess what? No diving for you for the next 6 months. If you shoot us an email and tell us that, then we won't be, waiting for those reports to come in. There's 2 kinds of reports. The artifact report, which comes to myself and Nate over at MRD, and then the fossil report, which Dave collects up at the State Museum. So these reports, we want them as detailed as you're willing to give them to us. We have some of our divers are fantastic reporters. They give us maps and sketches with scales and pictures, and it's great, and we really, really appreciate that. It helps us to kind of meet all of the goals that we would like to meet in terms of scientific study, and also then there's no question for them if they reported that item or not, because they've sent us pictures and detailed descriptions. The other thing with these reports is people always ask me, oh, it says what date did I dive? I dove more than once this quarter. Well, that means that you need to set a separate sheet for each dive. If you dive more than once in a day, then you still put the date on there. But every once in a while, we get reports that's like, I dove in this river, and this river, and this river. I'm like, and there's one date on there. I'm like, I know for sure that you were not getting from Beaufort to Florence in one day to do multiple dives. So it helps us collect information. It helps us tell where things are being found and when, and in what kind of quantity. So the importance of reporting is kind of what I was just talking about. We find out what is coming from where, it helps us protect sites. It helps us, monitor, fossil beds and make sure that those things aren't being overexploited by people who are out there trying to, exploit these things for commercial benefits. And then it also contributes to the historic and scientific dialogue. So that's why we want your reports, but why you should want a report is because then you have proof of title of that item. So when you send us your report, we have 60 days to process it and look at it and see what's in there. In that 60 days, that gives us the time to call you and say, hey, like that bottle you found, like can you send us another picture of that maker's mark because we think it could be something really cool, or hey, this, I don't know, what's something cool that we've gotten lately?
We had a wafer stamp reported recently. I haven't seen one of those since I've been with the institute.
Yeah, so if we wouldn't want that, but we want more information about it. And the same thing for Dave. If he sees something on that you report that's really compelling to him, he has that 60 days to ask you more about it. Every once in a while, if there is something, really, really exciting. So let's say you were diving near the Browns Ferry wreck, you found a bottle with a maker's mark. We have a strong suspicion that maybe that bottle is associated with that shipwreck, even though that shipwreck was excavated a number of years ago. We might ask you, hey, would you be willing to donate this to, not necessarily to us, but okay, do you want to donate this to the museum where the Browns Ferry is being held and displayed? Would you be willing to donate this to the State Museum? And you can say no. I don't know how much stuff you guys have in your house, but sometimes I'm like, maybe I should get rid of some of all of my old stuff that I have, and especially when people are really excited about it, it's fun to do that. And then you also get your name on a little plaque in the museum that says this was donated by so-and-so. But you also get to show off the cool things that you found to us. We are just excited about it as anybody else. This is what we do for fun and our profession. So when you send us those reports, we like to see them. And then you also can contribute to the scientific and historic knowledge of our state, which, I think that's cool. Maybe I'm just a nerd though. So. Again, we use the information to see what's out there, to report information. We put it in our private database, we analyze it for patterns, we manage and protect the sites, and 99 of 90% of the historic sites we know about in the state have come from the public. Now there's exceptions to that, obviously, but people were looking for the Hunley for years. When they found it, that came from the public. The cannons that we just did, that came from public knowledge. The whale skull was reported by a hobby diver. We can't be out there all the time. As much as I would love to be on the water every day, that's just not how it works. So 99% of those come from people who are out there having a good time and checking things out. And then it helps to, protect your own maritime heritage, your own hobby, what you're doing, what you enjoy. And it's fun to be an active part of the changing landscape. And I think it's enjoyable. So for information security, I know a lot of people are really concerned about this. We do not share information with anyone, period, outside of the state. If you call me and ask me about another diver or where they're diving, I'm not allowed to tell you, and I'm not going to tell you because honestly, it's not your business. You can go out and dive and have a good time, and if you go out with your dive buddies, that's great, but we can't share information about other people and what they're doing. Our database is closed. All of our records are closed. We do have a couple people who have a vested academic interest in those, and if that is something that happens, then we go through the proper channels to try to get those records released. But we can't just be oh, hey, you're interested in who was diving 40 years ago, here's a list of names. We can't do that. We have to go through a legal process to make sure that that's happening. We also make every volunteer intern, anyone who comes into our office and is there for more than just, a 5-minute chat, sign a non-disclosure agreement. And this is because if they overhear me on the phone getting a site report, if they see, us entering stuff into a database, which shouldn't happen, they're not allowed to talk about it. And if they do talk about it or share that information, there's consequences to those actions. And then this kind of just reiterates that, but I have been working in this professionally for 7 years, volunteering for 10 years. I worked for the Park Service. I've worked for a bunch of maritime museums. I have never gone to an institution that shares site information. It's just not something that's done in our profession. We don't share site information. Even if you go and look at professional publications, they might say something along the lines of a site in the Edisto River. They're never gonna put like GPS coordinates in there. They're never gonna say like, this is exactly where it is, for the same reason that we don't want them to, because we don't want a million people there. We don't want everything that's there to be gone. Now, if you share that information with us in your reports, all that information is ever used for is analysis and, you know, the scientific data side of it. It's not used to go out and exploit that site. It's not used to go and hunt. I mean, if I had time to fossil hunt, that would be like awesome, but
And if we do visit a site, we will normally contact the hobby diver and escort them or have them escort us to the site. That, you know, just expedites the process, gets us where we need to go quicker if it's an important find. But it's not something that we do in our free time at all.
And yeah, and we generally, like, if whoever from the public reports the site to us, we do take them with us, especially for diving. We have a whole bunch of safety rules that we have to follow that people as recreational divers do not have to follow. Like, we have to report all of our dives to a board, and we have all these logs. So it saves us like a huge headache to be like, hey, you dove over here, can you tell me what the current's like and the visibility and the water temperature and dive hazards and conditions, because we have to keep up with all those reports for every dive that we do. Even if we dive 20 times in the same place, every single dive, we have to have this whole dive safety thing. So it makes everyone's life easier. So beyond the hobby license, the state also issues 2 other types of licenses. They have an intensive survey license and a data recovery license. And these licenses go hand in hand. And this is if you decide that you want to collect beyond what the hobby license allows for. The data recovery license is issued with the idea that you're going to refine the area, define it, and maybe like sample, like do a soil sample or those kind of things. And that license is good for 90 days. Well, really what that license allows you to do is to survey an area that you're interested in doing some kind of activity beyond the hobby license. A lot of what we issue these licenses for are folks who are out looking for the submerged logs from like when timbering was a lot bigger. And this license also gives us time to make sure that we haven't issued a license for the same area, or that there's not someone else working in that area. And then the second part of that license, so once you've finished this and you send a report of what's out there, what you saw, the methods that you used to do your reconnaissance, is a data recovery license. And so the data recovery license is good for a year, and it's issued to conduct more extensive operations, including artifact recovery. So I don't think we have any that are currently issued. This is something that Jim Spyrick, the state underwater archaeologist, he is the determiner for if you get issued this license or not. But we've had this license issued for people who, you know, there's a wreck and they want to explore it further. And so we say, okay, give us how are you going to do it? Show us, you know, that you're going to do this in a responsible method. And then you can go out and do it. And then they send us a report. And then that's one less site that we have to go out and do, or find money to do and time to do. So both of these licenses do require oversight by an underwater archaeologist, and believe it or not, there's about 60 companies in the state of South Carolina that do remote survey, that have professional archaeologists on their team that can help with this process. But this is when people kind of start to take their hobby collecting and stuff in a commercial direction, this is what you actually need. You know, the hobby license is for fun. If you are trying to make money off of this, then you need to go in this direction and go through all the kind of proper channels.
We take a couple of calls a year with articulated fossils, or fossils that are embedded into substrate. That license, the commercial license or the intensive survey or recovery license, are what you would need to go through in order to excavate in South Carolina waterways.
So all 3 of those licenses do different things, but the hobby license this is what the state law specifically prohibits, okay? Digging and excavation. So no shovels, no rakes, no trowels. You're supposed to be collecting what's naturally eroding out of the riverbanks. You're not supposed to be in there digging and rummaging around. It prohibits commercial activities. So if you have reported to us and we know that you've gone through all the proper channels, after that 60 days, there's not a whole lot that we can do to kind of stop you. But if you're out, again, every day, you're pulling 100 teeth a day, you're putting them on eBay that night, that this license does not allow you to do this, and we can't protect you when ramifications start coming down. It doesn't allow you to investigate private property. Again, if you want to do that, that's up to you. I really hope you get permission from the property owner. I don't know about South Carolina, but I know in Florida that if you go on private property, they have the right to shoot you. So it's it's up to you what you want to do. It doesn't allow you to take structural items from shipwrecks. So no anchors, no wood pieces, things that to us could potentially be diagnostic to identify a shipwreck. Now, for us, that's really hard because we could spend time like looking at bottles and buttons and all those little things, but the hobby license, it just is just structural. So, and that's the kind of stuff you don't really want to pull up anyway. If you pull up a timber, unless you know how to conserve it, like it's just going to be a pile of dust in like 2 months. So, it does not allow you to remove the removal of embedded artifacts or fossils. So, if something is embedded in the dirt, you're not supposed to be digging to get it out. Not supposed to be scraping to get it out. You're supposed to be taking the things that are naturally eroding out of the riverbeds and the fossil beds. It does not allow for the removal of articulated skeletal remains. So if you see like 2 vertebrae touching each other, that's articulated skeletal remains. And I know that sometimes it's kind of hard to be like, well, how is that scientifically significant? But folks like Dave, who have spent their life studying these kind of things, can actually get a lot of important information from that. The other thing is, in the past few years, they've found quite a few like new species of whales and other, I think all mammals here in South Carolina. And so those articulated, skeletal remains are what lead to those exciting scientific finds. And then they bring more attention to our state and allow for more museums, more study, more of those kind of things. The use of mechanical equipment is also prohibited. And so if you see folks out there with dredges or blowers or lift bags, encourage them to not do that. And if you feel like it's really, really bad, I would call DNR. I know a lot of you guys have heard about the recent enforcement campaign that's been going on of the hobby license law, and that's a direct result of reports that we have gotten about destruction of habitat. So a lot of the DNR officers, their highest priority is not fossils and artifacts, but they go out, they see people with blowers off the side of their boat completely destroying the riverbed. They're worried about that. I guess there was some folks there's like endangered eels. They were out there with shovels and rakes and digging up the eel beds. There's endangered species of, I think it's like clam, it's called brim. There was folks digging up the brim beds. And so the DNR biologists are out there a lot more than we are, and they see that, and that is like what sets them off. So that's when these enforcement campaigns start going into effect, and we get a lot more law enforcement presence all of a sudden, is because folks are using mechanical equipment and destroying the riverbeds and destroying this habitat that is protected. And a good example of that is the Somerville Municipal Code. People were undercutting into the riverbeds and then causing collapses. So in Somerville now, they just say no collecting, period. Like, stay out of the river, don't go. It's like a zero tolerance policy. So obviously, like, we want to avoid the zero tolerance policy, but we also don't want the destruction of habitat. And also, it's a bummer, like, if you have a favorite spot that you go out and then the next time you go out there, you see someone with a dredge and a blower, and now that site is completely barren because someone went out there with mechanical equipment and just completely stripped the riverbed. So there's a few other laws to keep in mind that supersede anything that we do here in South Carolina. The protection of American war memorials, monuments, and veterans graves is one of them. Don't think that really applies to you folks as much as it does to the artifact collectors, but those are all things that are federally prosecutable. The Protection of Military Remains Act and War Graves Protection Act, again, the War Graves Protection Act protects any sunken military vessel, period. So that was the other part of that PD canon, why it took us so long, is because even though that was a Confederate shipwreck, our federal government still owns that. And so we had to get all sorts of special permission to go out and do that. The POW MIA folks can do some really amazing things. They recently found a submerged airplane in a tropical area, were able to get DNA from inside the leather shoe that had preserved in the cockpit to identify who that service member was. So where we might go out and be like diving, oh, this is a cool airplane. Oh, look, there's a boot. I think I want to take that. That is a protected site because that's someone's grave. And then that family now, after 45 years, is getting closure of what happened to their loved one. The same thing with the American Battlefield Protection Act. It covers, it covers places like Gettysburg, and it covers places, that are like that are bigger. Hopefully, we'll get a protection for what's offshore for our shipwrecks here, but it also protects really small, like skirmishes and stuff. I saw one a couple days ago where their battlefield is like the size of this table, and that's what's protected, and it's because 2 people had to stand off there. So it's just, if it's listed on a federal or state site as a place that should be honored and respected, then it's a place that you should probably stay away from. And then the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act mostly applies to human skeletal remains. If you find human skeletal remains, just get out of there, call the police. I specialize in human osteology, but I still don't have the expertise to be like, that's 200 years old versus that's a murder victim. So just stay away. It can also apply to grave goods. So if you know of a mound site that you like to dive near, and that's eroding into the river, just be careful, be wary. Some of those things like sealed pots can have human remains in them or animal remains in them, and those are things that the hobby license is not going to protect you if someone sees you doing that. And then last, there's state national parks. Don't dig in them. If you want to dive in them, go for it, but that again gets into federal laws, and you're not even really national parks and state parks, you're not supposed to take stuff off the beaches. They have all sorts of their own rules, and they have their own dedicated set of rangers. So where we're out in the rivers and on the ocean, there's not a lot of law enforcement. You go into a state park, how many rangers do you see? A lot, and all of them have the ability to ticket or arrest you. So on a happier note, our goals for 2016 are to develop a more open dialogue between divers and the state, to complete the current research that we have going on, which is related to the Yemassee Indians, the Stone Fleet, and we're working on a few other things, but this looks like it's going to be a season of getting our house in order, getting all our reports up to date and those kind of things. To do site investigations of sites that are uncovered by the recent flooding events. It's a tragedy what has happened in South Carolina, but it's also really exciting that we're going to see complete changes in the rivers.
We're already taking reports from items that have eroded out of creeks and rivers. So
this is going to be a big learning year for us about South Carolina's history. We're going to be working on an offshore survey in anticipation of future dredging projects in Charleston Harbor. There's a couple cool things that might happen with that. They're looking at taking some of the dredge material from expanding the harbor and possibly rebuilding some of the reefs and sandbars in the harbor, maybe shoring back up a few of the places of buildings that are kind of starting to erode. So we're working with a few federal agencies on that.
And a lot of that's related to the deepening project that's going on. They're trying to expedite that and get it moving as quickly as possible to accommodate larger ships. So it's the archaeology has to come first, and we're doing our best to work with them to make sure we aren't impacting sites in a negative way.
And then we have digitization of documents and further development of our database, which is something me and Nate will be working on, which isn't exciting or glamorous. I wish it was. And then we have a lot of other educational events. So I've only been in this position for about 5 months. My predecessor was gone 7 months before that. So for the past year, we haven't really had all of the kind of educational stuff that we like to do. So we normally do an artifact identification workshop. We do that twice a year. And so hopefully we're going to try to work with Dave to maybe develop a fossil identification workshop as well. We do a field training course, which is teaches archaeological methods as well as archaeological diving, which is just good, fun, and also develops your dive skills in a way that you might not have kind of thought about before. And then we're also going to do a volunteer dive safety checkout, and this is something that, so I come from a scientific diving background, so lots of like weird scientific experiment, fossil collecting, sample collecting, doing work underwater. So we want to have more volunteers in our kind of arsenal so that we can get more projects done. And this is going to be something that we kind of want to have divers do, because even if you're diving all the time, like, when's the last time you took your mask off completely underwater and put it back on and cleared it? When's the last time you buddy breathed? When's the last time you did an emergency surface ascent? Just to keep all those skills fresh, because we all know that diving in South Carolina, it's not pretty, it's not tropical. There's a lot of stuff floating around, there's trees and branches, just to kind of remind you, like, what do you do if you really have a real emergency? So that's something we're going to be working on as well. So that is all I have. So thank you guys for being good listeners. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now with the assistance of Dave and Nate. Or if you want to talk to us individually, you're welcome to do that as well. Dave?
Why would you take your mask off underwater?
If you are in a really high current environment and you're looking down and then you look up and your mask gets like ripped off, so then all of a sudden you have like water in your eyes and nose, so you want to put your mask on and like clear it, so then you can like see. And a lot of people panic if they don't have their mask on. One of the skills that you have to learn before you're allowed to teach other people to dive is how to guide people with no masks around the pool.
And in the summertime, the water around here gets so warm. I know in a lot of situations, my mask will overfog every 2 minutes or so. You got to take it off, wash it off, put it back on, clean.
Yeah, so.
Plus there's the eye itch, right?
Yeah, and everyone
Your
has.
eyeball. Nobody else raised their hand. I got a quick question. So I've been diving about 10 years, or a little bit less than that, but due to some of the drama on Facebook and other medias, I don't think it's a coincidence that in 7 or 8 years I got boarded once. And then the last 2 years I've been boarded 3 times. And I think DNR was once, Sheriff was the other 2. For those that have heard of this and they're like, oh no, I really didn't even think I was getting into the diving thing, but it happened, and now I dive all the time, and I never got the license. And it's kind of like not going to church. The longer you don't go, the more the guilt and the less likely they're to go. So what would you say to somebody like that is looking on the horizon, fearful of being boarded? They're diving, but they're not part of the program. What would you say to try to get them back into the program?
So I would say that if you've never been licensed with us before, like, the past is the past. There's nothing that we can do about that. So apply, get a license. If you've never been licensed before, we have no reason not to give you a license. If you have been licensed before and you weren't in compliance with the rules, what we do is we give you a chance to back in the reports that you're missing, to get caught up with us, and then we will give you a 6-month probationary license. As long as in that 6 months, so 2 reporting terms, we get your reports from you, and you don't do anything super crazy like try to pirate board a Coast Guard vessel or something, as long as there's not something extremely outstanding, which I can't even think of what it would be, we will issue you a 2-year license. But that is a one-time only thing. So at the end of the 2 years of your next license period, if we don't have consistent reports from you, or if we're missing a year of reports, we won't be able to issue you a license again. And then if you get pulled over or you get boarded and you don't have that license, you will get a ticket the first time, the second time. The third time is when it goes out of our hands. So the easiest way is just to stay in compliance with it. It's 4 times a year, we ask you to report what you've been finding. I don't think that that's too much to ask. Personally, I don't know how you guys all dive. When I'm diving for fun, I dive with my dive log. So when I dive, I make a few quick notes at the bottom of that dive log. If you keep your dive log, and at the end of the quarter, you'll know where you were diving, what you were finding, just by flipping back a few pages. That's not your thing, then find a system that works for you. But right now, because of the increased enforcement, we're doing our best to get everyone who wants to be licensed, people who haven't been in, good with us in the past, caught up, and giving them a second chance. But after that second chance, there's just not a whole lot we can do. But anyone right now, we're in a very forgiving mood. So we're really working with a lot of people to get people caught up, to get them their licenses.
In the absence of an actual and steadfast just refusal to cooperate with the program, it's almost impossible to lose these licenses.
If you're diving, say in a fast moving current, and a lot of times you can stake yourself out on the bottom of the river. If you're boarded or they come up on you before you surface, and you're not using that instrument to dig in the bottom, but you're using it to stake yourself down, would it be construed that you were digging in the bottom?
River tools are largely an exception. Anyone who's had any experience diving, particularly in the Cooper, knows that it's just about necessary to have to keep yourself.
Use a screwdriver, use a stake, but if you're out there with your 3-pronged garden rake, I've seen people use that as a tool to hold on to the bottom, is the rake that you get to do your garden. That, yes, they can construe as using a digging instrument. So use your dive knife, use a screwdriver, use a stake. There's a lot of other things that you can use to keep yourself down on the bottom, other than a rake or this little spade that I have, I'm using that to stake myself down to the bottom. I don't think that that's really gonna fly. The other
Really
side
up
of
to the
that,
officer too.
the other side of that is the officers have our phone number. So right now it's me. While I'm on maternity, it'll be Nate. But if they ticket someone, the very first thing that they do is they call us and say, hey, this is the person that I just ticketed. Do they have a license? Because if you don't have your license on you, which you should have your license on you at all times, because we're not always going to be able to take that call right away. Do they have a license? Yes, they do. Okay, I'll drop the ticket. Or, hey, I just ticketed this person. They said they never heard of this program. They didn't have a license. Do they have a license? No, they don't have a license, but they had a license 5 years ago. So yes, they were they're aware of this program. But again, the officers right now are much more concerned with the destruction of habitat. So what really set this off was that we got these reports of people in the low river before a nice little flood, walking shoulder to shoulder with floating screens and shovels, digging up the fossil beds. And I don't know about you, but in my mind, there's no definition that makes that a hobby, intermittent collecting. It's definitely not collecting what's eroding. You're definitely digging. You're using screens, which the law specifically prohibits. So that's what kind of set it all off, was this
What's
mass
interesting
destruction.
about that is some of those reports came from DNR biologists that they're not law enforcement, and they weren't even aware of this program. Of course, approaching people and asking what they were looking for, they found out they were searching for fossils.
Yeah,
Like 3 days to get out.
I get reports all the time of other stuff that's going on, and I call my contact, and they're like, oh, okay, blah, blah, blah. The first time I call, and I was like, hey, I got this report from a biologist that this is happening. They're destroying the brim beds, and they destroyed this eel bed. That weekend, they were out there. And now, I guess one of the DNR officers had been seeing a few people with shovels and rakes out there consistently in the same spot and just didn't know what to do about it. I was growing increasingly concerned, and then was like, oh, okay, this is what I can do about it. This is how I can stop these other negative repercussions through this one avenue. So,
And there was about a 15-year period where they weren't training new officers about the Underwater Antiquities Act. I can tell you that's changed in the past 18 months or so. They've been on a rapid hiring spree out there, and every single new officer is seeing a module on this law. So there's going to be a lot more awareness from the law enforcement community on the water. They share information with the local law enforcement agencies, the sheriff's office, local police departments, the police waterways. So, if you're not licensed now and you do collect underwater, it's a real good time to probably look into obtaining a license.
Yeah, two questions. Are you keeping data on non-underwater recoveries, like land, creek, ditch?
So if we get like creek or ditch, we will or if it's reported to us, we'll keep the data on it. In terms of like proper land sites, that is a different division. We have terrestrial archaeologists who deal with that.
And it's good if you contact us, we'll put you in contact
Yeah,
with
if
the
you
people.
if you find
SCIAA,
something, like we'll get you in touch with the right people.
Is,
But
is the boundaries of navigable water, is that how it's defined?
Yeah, and
it is so it is defined as navigable water, but it's both past and present navigable water. So, for example, like where the cannons were, that was they were building naval ships there. Could they get a naval vessel up that river now? No, sir. But it was navigable in the past, so it still falls under the protection.
another good example is Black Mingo Creek in Georgetown County. We have pictures of steamboats going up that creek, and today, you're lucky to get a canoe up the upper portions of it. It's still technically covered under the Underwater Antiquities Act because it was a formerly navigable water.
Second question about the cannons. I find it hard to believe you had a hard time getting resources to pull those up. How long did it take you, since you said, okay, we want to bring these up, how long did it take you to get funding?
I think it took about 8 years.
Yeah.
So the first step is that we had to get.
And that was
For
a single
five- yeah.
donation from
Yeah.
a doctor in Florence
Yeah, I
County.
think that you know those guys out there.
Yeah,
Well, the amount is the thing.
Yeah.
Is it takes almost $200,000 to conserve those. Yeah. So,
Right.
so the first step is like to even be able to pull them up. We had to get permission from the federal government because they still belong to them. Then the second part of it is then we had to then secure the funds. Then we had to wait for space to open up at the Hunley Center to be conserved. So the Hunley Center was like the ideal place for us because then we could also send them to Texas, but then that adds like another $100,000 in the price tag to get them out there. There's not a whole lot of places in the country that can do that kind of conservation. Then once you get the donations, like that 200,000 only covers the actual conservation. So we needed to find someone to cover the amount that it costs to insure the cannons from pulling them in Florence to getting them to Charleston on a truck. We needed to find someone who could pay for the time and labor of the backhoe operator. So that's kind of why it took a while. And then once we finally got that all secured, we're ready to go. We've been ready to go for about a year, and we're like, okay, we're gonna go out there this weekend. Okay, well, it's pouring rain, the river's 25 feet, we can't get the backhoe out there because the mud will slide. Okay, we're gonna go out there this weekend. Oh, here comes a hurricane. Okay, we're gonna go out there this week. So just finally getting like the timing of everything right to get all the people that needed to be out there with all the things that we needed to do. It just takes time.
I'll answer. As far as land sites, for the State Museum, I'm looking for anything and everything. So I happen to review the dive reports for the fossils, but I'm not one for the water. So, when it comes to like the Underwater Antiquities Act, I wasn't even familiar with it until I got to Columbia, because I don't do anything along the rivers. So I go into quarries or sand pits, that sort of thing. And so inland sites, anywhere in South Carolina, for me, if there's something out there that is found that is of paleontological interest, I'm interested in that. So, now that I'm at the State Museum and I know about the Underwater Antiquities Act, I've been to a few other places. The Ashley was one, where luckily the water was only yay deep for the most part. And then the PD River and Brownsbury, places like that. So I've kind of gotten out to a few other places that are not necessarily land sites.
But
So
with
we are
that,
looking for anything, any information. for the
That's
master
why we need
database.
volunteers also, because if Dave wants something that's in 8 feet of water, or we hear about it, then that's when we need volunteers who we know we can trust and who have the dive skills to go out and get it. Because I try to tell him, I'll teach him how to dive, but he's just not having it.
And
So.
the two divers who helped Dave, Jimmy Armstrong and Kat Sawyer, they've worked with us with many different projects over the years. From Browns Ferry, we did an investigation of the two ferry barges a couple of summers ago. They were out on the Yemassee project with us this summer. It takes a while to develop that level of trust with a diver to put them, particularly out with a non-diver on a site to make a recovery of that nature.
And just that whale skull that Jessica showed earlier, it was in the Ashley. That took 2 months just to plan to get out there, because it was, coordinate with the gentleman that found it, because we didn't know where it was at. And in that river, even though the water was only a foot deep, it was dark brown, so we never would have been able to find it, even if we had something sticking out of the water. And so it's kind of a
And the public at the volunteer base, they're integral, and even on the professional level, we've sent some of our divers out with Joe Harvey here to get checkouts on rivers. Some of them are very advanced divers, but haven't dove in 10, 15 years. And I think most of South Carolina rivers are unlike just about any other waterways in the nation. So,
Or they're like me, and they're California people that we don't do muddy water, so it's been a little bit of an adjustment.
but we appreciate folks like Joe who help us, to get people reacclimated to, or acclimated, period, to these types of dive situations.
So I work down at Esto Beach State Park, and I appreciate your inclusion of the state parks in this address. And we do have this fossil deposit offshore that washes them up on the beach. So for those that are out there, we actually do permit people to collect them at our park. But between low tide and high tide, if you're out there collecting, do you need a hobby diving license?
We call that area the low tide to high tide mark is the sandcastle zone, and anyone who's seen children out there with their shovels and bucket, they're not going to walk out and ticket anyone that's just recreationally digging.
I think we have stressed to the officers too that we've talked about when we educate them on this is like, if it's like a mom and their kid and they're walking down the river bank and they are picking up stuff, they're fine. They're not, it's, Joe Schmo with his screen and his shovel that are doing, are out there just going to town trying to get fossils. But yeah, the sandcastle zone is safe. I mean, if people want to get a hobby diver license, we're not going to tell them no. If they want to report to us what we're finding, we're happy to collect the information.
And I take probably a dozen reports a year from people collecting in Jeremy Inlet from the fossils and the pieces of Bettingsville Beach that are washing up from those offshore deposits. And, they're not technically required to report that, but it's helpful and it goes into the database and it contributes to our knowledge.
Anybody else?
One last quick question. For some people in this room dive pretty frequently, maybe once a week. Like I try to get out once a week. And then other guys maybe only get out 3 or 4 times a year. But after 20 years of diving, I knew this guy. He's like, I dove for 3 or 4 years, but it's not my thing anymore. It's like, but I got buckets and buckets of shark's teeth in my garage. He says, you should come over and look at them. For people that end up with just, like you said, you don't even have a warehouse big enough, but they end up with all this stuff. What do you recommend? Because obviously you guys don't want all these shark's teeth, but what would you suggest to them to make sure that there's nothing relevant there scientifically?
Yeah.
A lot of these folks might not know different species.
Yeah, no, definitely. We so there's a few things that we would encourage you to do, and a few things that we've been talking about doing moving forward is one, you can always call Dave and see if he wants to take them as a donation. If you have more than you want, Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that shark dentition is gigantic, and from a scientific perspective, you need to have multiple individuals to actually make scientific kind of claims. So if for a person, if you found 20 teeth, well, that's not one whole dentition. Now, if you have 800 teeth, then you have enough potential dentitions to actually make a scientific statement. So that's one possibility. The other possibility that we've talked about, we can come out and do a collection assessment. We would bring Dave or someone with us, since me and Nate are not necessarily qualified to identify every single fossil that you found, and just tell you about what you have and kind of explain, hey, this is what you have, this is what's interesting, this is what isn't. If you decide that you want to do something else with your collection, before you distribute it to people or the public, we would encourage you to have it tested. Jewelry made from shark's teeth needs to be tested for its radioactive qualities before it can be used. We would encourage you, before you just hand it out hodgepodge, to kind of have it tested to make sure that it's not, emitting anything unsafe. Which is also another thing, that if you wanted to donate it to us, we will have it tested, and then we can use it at education and outreach events specifically for kids and for the public. They like to be able to handle stuff, so we have one guy who's given us a couple 3D prints, which are awesome, because then we can say, hey, this is what a megatooth looks like, but if you drop it, I don't have to kill you. So but if you have a bunch of like the little ones or the non-perfect ones that we can say, hey, like, come look at these. And I know the museum has a teaching collection as well that's kind of the same thing, where things are out of provenience, so we can't make big scientific statements about them, but we can still share them with the public and let them touch them and interact with them. We're happy to accept those as donations as well.
And if you've collected them in a certain locality, a lot of times, even if the state museum doesn't want them, we can help make connections to get you in contact with a local museum, educational institution, someone who will maybe be willing to take them off your hands and put them to good educational use.
Schools are always looking for stuff.
Yeah.
High schools and
We have a volunteer who she puts everything from the year that she finds together in grab bags, and then when her and her dive buddy go out and do talks at schools, she has something for every kid that's in the class, and they obviously they love it. It's they think it's like the coolest thing ever. So there's a lot of possibilities. So if you have buckets of stuff that you don't want, you can give us a call. We'll help figure out what to do with it. I'm probably not gonna take it home with me because I don't need buckets of stuff, but we'll find a place for it.
Dave, are there any specific species right now, fossil, that the museum is looking for? I mean, that's of particular interest?
mostly in the rivers, terrestrial, land mammal types things. Not necessarily horse teeth or llama teeth, but skulls in particular, because a lot of times it's kind of hard to tell one llama or one horse from another just from a tooth. But if you have a jaw with all the teeth in it, or if you have the skull for sure, there are some odd things like dire wolves and cheetah and lion and muskox, things that we don't know too much about because we only have a piece here and a piece there. And actually, to go back with what Jason was saying, is that back in the 70s, the State Museum's original collection consists of dive specimens and just boxes and boxes of things that divers collected, didn't know what it was, threw it all together and said, here you go. And finally somebody at the State Museum gets to go through it, and there's bison toe, muskox toe, a piece of the saber cat, piece of a cheetah, that sort of thing. So just because folks, when they find it, looks just like a chunk of bone, whatever, no big deal, but it could be something that's pretty neat. Or the shark teeth. That's sort of my area of interest, I guess. I don't know if I can say expertise, but like Jessica was saying, is that like with a megalodon, the upper teeth are different from the lower teeth, front different from the back. So with the State Museum, we're kind of looking for a variety. So the different positions in a shark's mouth. So we have that representative. So we can always say that's this part or that's that part, sort of thing. So I've got a list, I suppose. And what we're trying to do at the State Museum is compiling this kind of there's actually a project right now going on with the mammalian biostratigraphy in South Carolina. So going from the Cretaceous 72 million years ago on up to the Pleistocene. So trying to figure out all the different kinds of mammals that were here in South Carolina. And I think that list is only up to 200 and some odd species. And that's 72 million years worth of time. And that's not that many when you think of that amount of time. There are more than that right now in South Carolina. So as folks go out into the rivers, it doesn't have to be a diver, it could be just somebody walking along, pick something up and lets us know. It could be something that's completely unknown before from South Carolina, or a piece that lets us know for sure that one particular animal or another was here, that sort of thing. So I'm happy to look at anything, and it doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to accept the 500 shark teeth. If we have a sample already in the museum, we're always looking for things that are different. That's not necessarily represented in the collection. And there are other museums that would be interested, and certainly not a museum, then there are high schools and there are elementary schools that, fossils are in their curriculum. So they're always asking the State Museum, do we have anything that we could let them use for, the different types of fossilization, what is a fossil, that sort of thing. So there's usually a place out there that'd be interested.
We'll find a home.
Yeah.
If you want to donate something or you have stuff that we'll find it a home.
And if playing with that, even on the artifactual end, the Watsons are usually the most interesting reports we get. If the diver's having difficulty identifying it, it's likely it's a rarer object, and those are just like with the fossils, the items that get us most excited.
Right, well, if there's no other questions, we're gonna hang out for a little bit. If you have individual questions that you want to ask or something specific, and thank you all for listening and for coming. We really appreciate it. We're always happy to take your phone calls. I have brochures about the hobby program up front if you are interested. You can always get us for email at mrd@sc.edu, which is also on the brochure. And we do our absolute best to get back to you as quickly as possible. I know that in the past month it's been a little crazy. We were out of the office for 2 weeks with the cannons, then our office was closed for a week because of the flooding, then we had a transformer blow, so we had no internet. So we do our best to get back as quickly as possible, but again, there's 4 of us for the whole state. So sometimes it just doesn't happen the way we
Email
want to.
is the best way. For example, when offices are closed or we're in the field, we can, even pull out the smartphone and give you a short response to maybe get back with you or ask for more information.
Thanks very much for coming, guys.
Thank you.